In this video, I'm going to show you how the AI system in the game is set up and how you can modify the characters and the AI of them to basically change the way your game plays. So we're going to start, we're again here in scene gameplay, and we're going to start by looking at the AI controller. This is basically what manages all your different characters in the level. Underneath the AI controller, we have basically each character here, which is basically just an empty container, which contains their routes. So a route is just a path of teleport points that they'll take through the level to try and get to you. So you can see here, each one of these is a teleport point, which is really all it is it's a spot with this teleport script on it. Underneath it, it has prefab, which is just the character pre-posed in a certain way. So the characters don't actually teleport. They basically just get turned off and on in their different poses throughout the level. And this is so you can do things like it's a lot easier to see them while you're placing them, and you can see how the light's going to play with them and shadows, and you can even do things like bake in the lighting if you want to increase performance or just make it look better, things like that. So we'll go back here starting with the AI controller. And I'll go through each of these scripts and what they do and what you can change on them. So in the AI controller, we have a list of all the enemies in your level. In this level, there's only two characters right now, so we'll just look at one of them. So the first thing under here you have is a name for the character. Now this doesn't ever actually get displayed to the player in game. This is just for you for debugging purposes. If you turn on logging, you'll be able to see some messages in the console and it'll tag them with the character's name so that you'll know what's kind of going on with that character. Next up, we have just a list of their routes that they can use. So they can have as many or as few routes to choose from as possible. Basically, when they start moving in the level, they'll randomly pick one of these routes to move along. Next, we have some settings that control how they move through the level. So we have here this movement enumeration, which they can either teleport in sequence through the different points in the routes, which means they'll start at the furthest one and then more or less teleport forward through them in order. They will jump forward and back a little bit. There's some settings you can control so that it's not just following the exact same order every time, but more or less they'll try to go from the farthest one to the closest one. You can also set it to teleport anywhere, and this basically means that they can just randomly teleport to pretty much any spot on the route. It doesn't matter to them. They'll just pick random places to go to. Then we have the movement trigger, and this defines what causes the creature or monster to actually move. So there's two options. You can either have it so that they move after a certain length of time not being viewed, or after a certain time of being viewed. So if it's not being viewed, then basically if you're looking at them, they will generally not move until you look away. Um, Now, if you set it to viewed, what it'll do is they will only move after you've looked at them for a certain amount of time. They won't actually move while you're looking at them. They'll wait until you look away, but it basically just means that you have to actually look at them through a certain camera for a certain amount of time before they'll try and move. Um, Now, there are some exceptions to that, which is kind of in this next part here. So we have a movement delay. And this is kind of a general delay. Basically, every time they move, it picks a random value between this min and maximum for a timer that basically when the timer expires, they will always move no matter what. And this is to prevent basically the player from locking down an enemy by basically looking at its camera for too long, or if the enemy is set to move when viewed, then basically this means that the enemy will still eventually move even if the player never looks at any cameras. So this is just to guarantee that they do at some point move. If you happen to be looking at one of these monsters when this timer expires, what will happen is the power will kind of flicker for a minute and the cameras will go off, and then the creature will move while the camera's off. So you don't ever actually see them blink out. It always basically plays that power flicker effect so that it kind of masks their movement. Next we have the viewed and not viewed delay. Whichever one gets used is depending on this trigger. So if you have them set to not viewed, then it'll use the not viewed delay, and likewise with the viewed. This basically just controls the amount of time that you have to either be looking at them or not looking at them for them to move. And it also has a minimum and maximum value so that it kind of picks a new one every single time they teleport, so that sometimes they'll move quicker than others. This is just a reference to the creature's animator that controls basically the attack animation that they play when they get too close to you, and basically when it's game over. So if you want to change up your animations or animator, you'd want to hook it up here. And then we have some sound effects. So the nearby sound effect will play whenever they get within basically 5 teleport points of the player. So anytime they teleport into one of the last 5 points, it'll play this sound effect to alert the player that there's a monster nearby. This sound effect can only play once every, I think it's something like 15 seconds. So if you have a lot of monsters moving around or they're constantly moving between spots near you, it won't keep playing this over and over, only every once in a while. Then you have the doorway sound effect. This is basically the I just noticed I have these reversed in here. The doorway sound effect is supposed to be the sound effect that plays when you actually see the monster outside your door. So either if you see them in the, let's go show, so if you see them in the window here, if you see them in this doorway, and also if you see him in this spot through the camera. So basically these last 3 spots will play that sound effect. And that's basically just to kind of give the player a little bit of a jump and tell them that you better close that door really fast. And then lastly, we have their attack sound, and this is the sound effect that gets played when they actually play their attack animation. It's usually a loud shriek, something to make the player jump. And then finally, we have this checkbox, which is to turn on logging. And what this will do is, this doesn't affect in-game at all. It just means when you have this checked, while the characters are moving around, it'll put a bunch of details into the console log, telling you what they're doing and when and why and things like that, which is useful for debugging them and if you're trying to figure out why they're moving a certain way. So that is the AI controller. Next we'll go into details on how the actual routes and characters are set up themselves. So like I said, the character here is just a container for a bunch of routes. So we'll go straight down to one of the routes. And I have here defined 2 different routes for the character. Basically, one takes them to the left side of the office and one takes them to the right side. So we'll look at this one, route 1. And as you can see here, it's kind of highlighted the different points on the route that he goes to. So you can see his route through the level. So on this script, we have a list of teleport points, and this basically goes from the furthest one to the closest 3. So they're put into this array in order. So if you want to add more, you need to make sure that they're in the right spot in this array, basically, for how far they are. And then we have a few settings you can tweak for the route, which is their forwards and backwards range and their move weight. So the forwards range basically tells you how many spots, it's a random range that tells you how many spots they will move when they move forward. So this guy on this route, he will move anywhere from 1 to 3 spots every time he moves. Next we have the backwards range, and when he decides to move backwards, this defines how far he will move. He'll either move 1 or 2 spots. You can raise or lower this if you want. Generally, you don't want to have the backwards range ever any higher than the forwards range, because then you could run into a problem where they basically never reach the player. So usually you'd want to keep this lower. But then you also have this forward move weight, and this controls the chance that they will move forward whenever they choose to move. So right now this guy is set to 70% of the time he'll move forward. So you could raise this up so he'll always move forward, or if you put it lower, then this means that he'll mostly move backwards, which is kind of a silly thing to do because you want him to move forwards usually, but it basically just gives you a little bit of tweaking in how they move. Okay, so moving on, we'll describe how the route here is actually set up. So like I said, this is just a series of teleport points, and so each teleport point is a game object that has underneath it the character, and then on the teleport point itself you can set up a few simple settings, and I'll go through what each one does here. So the point ID, this is basically a unique ID for the point. Well, sorry, that's not true. It's not unique. This is an ID that will tell the game basically where this point is. So if you ever have two teleport points anywhere on any route that share the same ID, this basically tells the game that only one character can ever be at that point. So if you have two characters that could possibly teleport to the same point, you want to make sure that both of those points have this ID set up. A good example of this is near the doorways. So let's say the left door here. You'll notice on both characters they have a left door point, which is identical. And you wouldn't want two characters teleported to that point, so they both share this left door point ID. So that means that only one character will ever use that point. Next we have a pointer to the character model that needs to be displayed at this point. By default, let me get back to it here. So by default, this will automatically search for the first renderer that it finds underneath it. So I don't actually hook these up most of the time because I just put a prefab underneath, and then when the game starts, it'll automatically find that. But if for some reason you didn't want to set it up that way, or you wanted the character to be somewhere else in your hierarchy, you could point it here, and basically that'll tell it to turn on and off that model. Next we have a couple checkboxes that tell them basically what they can do at this point. So if you set can attack, that means that the creature can actually attack you from that point. So you'll see here the last three, the window, the door, and the hidden one, the player can, or the enemy can attack from. And then you also have this can cancel attack, and this basically tells the enemy that there is a chance that he will, instead of attacking the player, just go away. This is set up in the hidden spot, and that's because it's basically if the enemy ever uses this spot, it's a hard one because you can't actually see him from the office. The only way you can see is if you look through this camera. So because that's a difficult spot for him to teleport to, we give the player a slight chance that he'll just kind of go away. And that chance actually changes based on the difficulty scale that you set for the level. And then next up we have a linked light and a linked door. Now this you would set up again on these attack spots. Basically the linked light you would hook up to whatever light is being controlled by this button. So you'll see here we have the light button. It is controlling this hall left light, and that's what illuminates the character when you turn it on. So what this actually does is when you turn on the light, the character is turned on only at that point. He's basically invisible when the light's off, and this is to kind of prevent you being able to kind of accidentally see him if there's any, residual light coming down the hallway or anything. Just make sure that he's actually invisible until you turn on the light. So you'll want to hook that up if you have a character that can be hidden by light. Likewise, for attack spots, you want to hook up a linked door because the door is the only thing that can save you from an attack. So what you would do is you would hook this up to the button that controls the door, and then that way this teleport point will know what the state of that door is and whether the character should actually attack you or if he should just go away. Yeah, so that's pretty much what makes up the AI system. So if you wanted to, say, add a new point on a route, you could do things like, I'll just take this one and duplicate it, move him a little higher up, give it a different name, whatever. And let's say I place him over here. This doesn't really make sense on his route, but for this example. So you'd see him if you actually looked at this camera. He might show up on there. There's not really a lot I need to set up here. If I wanted to, I could specify a point ID. I don't necessarily care with this one because there's no other character that's ever going to teleport to this point. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh, sorry, one other thing. I have to add it to the teleport points route. So I find the easiest way to do this, just to make sure that everything stays, is I always just clear out this array, lock the inspector, and then you can just select all of these and just drag them on here. And then it'll automatically put them in the correct order. Basically whatever order you have set up in your hierarchy there. So that's how you would go about adding a teleport point.